The briefing room at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado fell silent when she walked in. Lieutenant Commander Raina Solis moved with the deliberate calm of someone who had learned long ago that every entrance was a test. Her Navy-type III uniform bore the Trident insignia on her chest, but it was the scarred knuckles and the way she held her folder that told the real story. 6 Marine Corps instructors sat across the table, arms crossed, expressions ranging from skeptical to openly dismissive. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting horizontal shadows across their faces. She could feel their eyes tracking every movement, cataloging every detail, searching for weakness. This was supposed to be a routine cross-service training evaluation. Naval Special Warfare wanted to assess hand-to-hand combat protocols with Marine Corps Martial Arts Program black belts. Standard procedure. Except nothing about Raina Solis was standard. The lead instructor, a barrel-chested gunnery sergeant named Voss with 23 years of service, leaned back in his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So they sent us a pilot," he said, the word pilot carrying just enough emphasis to make it sound like an insult. Raina set her folder down without looking at him. "They sent you an operator." The distinction was everything. Pilots flew. Operators did what needed doing wherever it needed doing. The difference between the two was measured in blood, sweat, and the willingness to become something most people couldn't imagine. Voss glanced at his colleagues, that same thin smile playing across his face. "We've been doing this for a while, ma'am. No disrespect, but close-quarters combat isn't something you pick up in a cockpit." Raina finally met his eyes. "You're right. I didn't learn it in a cockpit." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. There was history in those words, the kind that came with scars both visible and hidden. But before anyone could respond, the training coordinator cleared his throat and shuffled papers. The demonstration would begin in 30 minutes. 6 Marines against 1 SEAL. Hand-to-hand, no weapons, controlled environment. The brass wanted data on technique integration. What they were about to get was something else entirely. Outside, the California morning was perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the low 70s, a light breeze carrying the smell of salt water and gun oil. Raina walked toward the training facility alone, her shadow stretching long across the concrete. Behind her, she could hear the Marines talking in low voices, the occasional burst of laughter. They thought they knew how this would go. They had no idea who she was or what she'd survived. They didn't know about Kandahar, about the mission that had gone wrong in ways that still woke her up at night. They didn't know about the 8 months of recovery, the physical therapy that felt like torture, or the choice she'd made afterward. They didn't know that before she wore the Trident, she'd already proven herself in ways most people never would. The training facility was a converted warehouse with padded floors and walls lined with mirrors. Standard-issue boxing ring in the center, heavy bags hanging in corners, the smell of sweat and rubber matting. Raina changed in silence, trading her uniform for standard PT gear. Black shorts, gray shirt with Naval Special Warfare Command printed across the chest, bare feet. She wrapped her hands carefully, each loop of tape a ritual, a preparation. Through the walls she could hear voices, the Marines suiting up, their confidence audible even through concrete and insulation. When she stepped into the main room, all 6 were already there. Voss stood at the center with his arms crossed, flanked by 5 others who looked like they'd been carved from granite. Staff Sergeant Mercado, tall and lean with reach like a middleweight boxer. Sergeant Rodriguez, compact and explosive, known for his takedown speed. Corporal Jenkins, the grappler with shoulders that suggested he spent his free time moving mountains. Corporal DeSanto, the technician, precise and analytical. And Private First Class Chen, the youngest, hungry to prove himself in front of the senior ranks. They were good. Raina could see it in their stance, their readiness, the way they moved even standing still. This wasn't about disrespect toward the Navy. This was about pride, about proving that Marines own ground combat the way pilots own the sky. What they didn't understand was that Raina Solis had stopped being just a pilot the day her Black Hawk went down in the Hindu Kush. The training coordinator, a Navy lieutenant commander named Ashworth, stepped forward with a clipboard and a whistle. "All right, listen up. This is a controlled demonstration of hand-to-hand combat techniques. No striking to the back of the head, throat, or groin. Tap out is immediate cessation. We're here to evaluate integration of naval special warfare close quarters battle with Marine Corps martial arts program methodology. He looked at Reyna, then at the 6 Marines. Lieutenant Commander Solis will engage each of you individually 3-minute rounds, 1-minute rest between. Medical is standing by. Questions? Voss raised his hand slightly. What if she wants to stop? Ashworth's expression hardened. Then she taps out. And if we want to stop, Reyna spoke before Ashworth could answer. Then you tap out. The room went quiet again. There was something in her voice, a flatness that suggested she'd seen things that made this seem like a game. Voss studied her for a long moment, and for the first time his smile faltered. Then he nodded once. Ladies first. Reyna walked to the center of the mat. Mercado stepped forward to face her, and the way he moved was pure confidence. He had 6 inches on her and 40 pounds, probably spent his mornings running mountain trails and his evenings in the gym. His stance was textbook, weight distributed, hands up, eyes locked on her center mass. The whistle blew. They circled each other for 5 seconds. Then Mercado feinted left and shot in for a takedown, fast and low, the kind of level change that came from 10,000 repetitions. Reyna didn't retreat. She pivoted into him, her left hand catching his lead wrist while her right forearm drove across his neck. Her hips shifted, and suddenly Mercado's momentum was working against him. He realized his mistake half a second too late. She used his own speed to throw him, a classical judo technique executed with brutal efficiency, and he hit the mat hard enough that the sound echoed off the walls. Mercado tried to recover, rolling to prevent her from establishing position, but Reyna was already moving. She trapped his arm, secured a crucifix position, and had him in a modified choke before he could reset his defense. He tapped twice, fast and definitive. Elapsed time, 19 seconds. The Marine stared. Ashworth marked something on his clipboard. Reyna stood and offered her hand. Mercado took it, his face unreadable, and walked back to the group without a word. Voss watched with different eyes now. Rodriguez stepped forward next, and if Mercado had been fast, Rodriguez was explosive. He didn't waste time with feints. The whistle blew and he attacked immediately, a barrage of strikes designed to overwhelm, back her toward the wall, cut off her angles. Reyna absorbed the pressure, her defense tight, reading his rhythm. She waited for the pattern to repeat, that fraction of a second when he committed too heavily to a right cross, and then she moved inside his reach. Her elbow found his solar plexus, not hard enough to injure but enough to disrupt his breathing. While he hesitated, she swept his lead leg and took him to the ground. Rodriguez tried to establish guard, but she passed smoothly, achieving mount in one fluid motion. He bucked, tried to bridge, but she rode it out like she'd done this 1,000 times before, because she had. Her hands found his collar and she applied pressure, a cross-collar choke that tightened like a python. Rodriguez held out longer than Mercado, maybe 25 seconds, his face reddening before he tapped. Elapsed time, 47 seconds. Jenkins came next, the grappler, the one who probably thought this was his moment. He approached carefully, respectful of what he'd just seen, but confident in his ground game. They tied up, and immediately it was a different kind of fight. Jenkins had excellent technique, his grip strong, his base solid. They went to the ground together in a controlled exchange, and for a minute it looked competitive. Jenkins almost secured back control. Almost. Reyna defended with patience, waiting for him to overcommit, to try to force a submission that wasn't quite there. When he did, she escaped, reverse position, and caught him in an armbar so clean it could have been a demonstration video. Jenkins tapped before she could extend it fully. Elapsed time, 1 minute 34 seconds. The respect in the room had shifted. This wasn't luck. This wasn't about size or strength. This was skill, experience, and a level of technique that came from somewhere these Marines couldn't quite identify. DeSanto approached with visible caution, trying to solve the puzzle. He fought smart, mixing strikes and grappling, trying to keep her guessing. But Reyna wasn't guessing. She was reading him, anticipating, staying 2 moves ahead. When he committed to a takedown, she sprawled and took his back, sinking in a rear naked choke that gave him no choice but to tap. Elapsed time, 1 minute 12 seconds. Chen was last, the youngest, and now he looked like he regretted volunteering for this demonstration. But he stepped forward anyway because that's what Marines do. They don't quit. The fight lasted longer than the others, not because Chen was better, but because Reina let it. She could feel the room's energy, understood that completely dismantling the kid in 30 seconds would be cruel. So she worked with him, showed him where his defense failed, where his offense left openings. When she finally submitted him with a triangle choke, it was almost gentle. Elapsed time, 2 minutes 41 seconds. 5 down. Voss looked at his team, then at Reina. The confidence was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He stepped onto the mat himself, and this time there was no smile, no bravado. Just a professional acknowledging another professional. The whistle blew and they engaged. Voss was the best of them, his technique polished, his experience evident in every movement. They traded positions, neither gaining clear advantage for the first minute. He caught her in a dangerous submission attempt, a heel hook that could have ended badly. She defended, escaped, and countered with a sequence that forced him to defend in turn. They fought for the full 3 minutes, and when the whistle blew, neither had tapped. They separated, breathing hard, and Voss nodded once. That nod carried more weight than any words. Ashworth stepped forward. Outstanding, Lieutenant Commander, excellent demonstration. But Reina wasn't looking at Ashworth. She was looking at Voss, who was looking back at her with a question in his eyes. Who are you? Where did you learn this? Finally, Voss spoke. No disrespect intended earlier, ma'am. I made assumptions. Reina unwrapped her hands slowly. We all do. Where'd you train? It was the question they were all thinking. Reina considered the 6 faces watching her, these Marines who had started the morning thinking they knew how it would go. She could walk away now, leave them wondering, or she could give them the truth. Started with Krav Maga when I was 16. My father thought his daughter should be able to defend herself. Then collegiate judo at San Diego State. 4 years. She paused. Then I became a Navy helicopter pilot. Flew Seahawks out of North Island, got pretty good at it. The Marines listened, starting to understand. Deployed to Afghanistan in 2012. My Black Hawk took an RPG over the Korangal Valley. We went down hard. My co-pilot didn't make it. My crew chief lost his legs. I broke my back, my left arm, 4 ribs, and my jaw. The room was absolutely silent. Spent 8 months learning to walk again. When I could stand without wanting to scream, I requested transfer to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. They said I was crazy, said I'd never pass selection, said pilots don't become SEALs. She looked at each of them in turn. I passed. 3rd attempt. Only woman in my class to graduate. That was 6 years ago. Since then, I've done things I can't talk about in places I can't name. But hand to hand, that's the easy part. That's just technique and repetition. The hard part is deciding you're not done, even when every reasonable person tells you that you should be. Voss extended his hand. When she took it, his grip was firm, equal. Thank you for the lesson, ma'am. Rodriguez stepped forward next, then Mercado, then the others, each offering the same respect. What had started as a test had become something else, a moment of recognition between warriors. Outside, the California sun climbed higher. Ashworth made notes on his clipboard, documenting a successful cross-service training evaluation. But the real lesson wouldn't appear in any report. The Marines filed out slowly, talking in low voices, their entire morning recontextualized. Reina sat on the edge of the mat, her breathing still elevated, her mind drifting to places she usually kept locked away. The crash, the pain, the choice to rebuild herself into something harder, sharper, more capable. People saw the trident and thought they understood. They didn't. The trident was just metal and myth. The reality was scar tissue, discipline, and a refusal to accept limitations that others considered absolute. She thought about the pilot she'd been, young and confident, certain that flying was her destiny. That version of herself had died in the Hindu Kush. What emerged from the wreckage was something different, something forged in pain and determination. The scars on her back still ached when the weather changed, a permanent reminder that survival was just the beginning. Evolution was the goal. Her call sign in the pilot days had been Monarch, a reference to the butterfly and a joke about her last name, Solis, meaning sun. After she became a SEAL, some of the guys wanted to change it. She refused. The butterfly that emerged from the chrysalis wasn't the same creature that went in. That transformation, that complete reconstruction of identity, was the point. Monarch fit perfectly. It always had. She stood, rolling her shoulders, feeling the familiar tightness in her lower back where the vertebrae had been pinned back together. Pain was just information. It told you where your limits were so you could push past them. Raina walked to the locker room, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Behind her, she heard the door open, boots on concrete. She turned to find Voss standing there, alone now, without the audience of his team. He held something in his hand, a small challenge coin with the Marine Corps emblem. "This is from my first deployment," he said. "Iraq 2005, Fallujah. I was 21 years old and absolutely certain I was invincible." He held it out. "I want you to have it." Raina looked at the coin, then at him. "Why?" "Because I started this morning thinking I was about to teach a lesson. Turns out I was here to learn one." His eyes were serious. "I've trained thousands of Marines. I can spot technical skill. But what you showed today wasn't just technique, it was something else. Purpose, maybe, or proof that the human will is stronger than the human body." He pressed the coin into her hand. "I was infantry. Did 3 tours before I moved into training command. I've seen people overcome injuries, but I've never met someone who chose to go from recovery into the hardest selection program in the military. That's not normal, ma'am. That's exceptional." Raina closed her fingers around the coin. The metal was warm from his hand, worn smooth from years of being carried. "I'm not exceptional, I'm just stubborn." Voss smiled, a real smile this time. Same thing, different word. He started to turn away, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why SEALs? After everything you went through, you could have stayed a pilot, could have taken a desk job, could have medically retired with full honors. Why put yourself through selection?" It was the question everyone asked, the one she'd answered 100 times in 100 different ways. But standing here in this quiet hallway with this Marine who'd started the day as an adversary and ended it as something like an ally, she decided to give the real answer. "Because when my Black Hawk went down, I was helpless. I did everything right. Perfect mechanical check, proper flight protocols, correct evasive maneuvers. Didn't matter. That RPG still found us. My co-pilot still died. My crew chief still lost his legs. I still broke my back." She looked at the coin in her hand. "I spent 8 months lying in a hospital bed thinking about that helplessness. About how being good at one thing, being an expert, didn't matter when circumstances changed. I realized that specialization made you vulnerable, so I decided to become something else. Something that couldn't be trapped in a cockpit, waiting for physics and fate to decide my survival." Voss nodded slowly. "You made yourself into the kind of operator who could survive anything. I made myself into someone who could adapt to anything. Flying is beautiful. I loved it. But it's also limiting. You're only effective in specific circumstances with specific equipment in a specific environment. On the ground, without my helicopter, I was just another wounded body waiting for extraction. That was unacceptable. So you learned to fight. I learned to be effective in any environment, against any threat, with or without equipment. That's what special warfare means. Not that you're special, but that you're adaptable. You can operate in any domain, sea, air, land, and accomplish the mission regardless of circumstances." Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then he came to attention and saluted, a formal gesture of respect that transcended service branches. Raina returned it, and they stood there in the empty hallway, 2 warriors acknowledging each other across the divide of their different uniforms. When Voss left, Raina stood alone again. She looked at the challenge coin, at the Marine emblem worn smooth by time and touch. She understood what it represented. This offering from a man who had started the day ready to humble her and ended it giving her a piece of his history. The rest of the day passed in briefings and paperwork, the mundane administrative reality that filled the spaces between operations. Raina sat through a meeting about equipment requisitions, another about training schedules for a new SEAL team preparing for deployment. She offered input when asked, stayed quiet otherwise, and watched the clock count down toward evening. At 1800 hours, she changed back into civilian clothes, jeans and a navy sweatshirt, and walked out to the parking lot. Her truck was old, a battered Toyota from the late 90s that had survived multiple deployments stored in a friend's garage. It started on the third try, the engine coughing before settling into its familiar rough idle. She drove north on the 5, past Camp Pendleton, past Oceanside and Carlsbad, the Pacific Ocean visible in glimpses between buildings and trees. Traffic was light for a weekday evening, the highway cutting through the coastal sprawl of Southern California. She thought about Mercado's face when she threw him, the surprise in his eyes, about Rodriguez tapping out, his breathing ragged, about Jenkins and DeSanto and Chen, each one skilled, each one learning in real time that their assumptions were wrong, about Voss, who had the wisdom to adjust his understanding when confronted with new information. People carried so many assumptions about what was possible, about who could do what. Gender was the obvious one, the first filter people applied. But there were others, subtler, more insidious. Age, background, previous career choices. People looked at her record and saw pilot and assumed that defined her capabilities. They couldn't imagine that someone might contain multitudes, might be capable of complete self-reinvention. By the time she reached her apartment in Encinitas, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost artificial in their intensity. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, unlocked her door, and stepped into the small space that had been home for the past 2 years. The apartment was sparse. A couch, a coffee table, a television that rarely got turned on. The kitchen was clean but clearly unused for anything complicated. The bedroom contained a bed, a dresser, and a small desk with a laptop. No pictures on the walls, no personal mementos on display, nothing that would tell a visitor who lived here or what they valued. Raina dropped her keys in the bowl by the door and walked to the sliding glass door that opened onto a narrow balcony. She stepped outside and leaned on the railing, looking at the ocean in the distance, listening to the sound of traffic and birds and the distant rhythm of waves. This was the part of the day she usually struggled with. The quiet, the absence of mission parameters and clear objectives. The moments when her mind wasn't occupied with briefings or training or operations, when it was free to wander into territory she preferred to avoid. She thought about her co-pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who had been 26 years old and engaged to be married. About Chief Petty Officer James Rivera, her crew chief, who had 3 kids and coached Little League Baseball. About the mission brief that had seemed routine, the intelligence that had missed the insurgent cell with the RPG, the seconds between the launch and impact when she'd seen it coming and known there was nothing she could do. The crash itself was a blur of noise and pain and violent motion. What came after was clearer, hours of lying in the wreckage, unable to move, listening to Marcus's breathing get shallower and stop, listening to Rivera scream until the morphine from his personal kit kicked in. The rescue team arrived 4 hours later. By then she'd accepted that she was going to die. The fact that she didn't felt less like salvation and more like an accident, a cosmic clerical error that left her alive when logic said she should have been counted among the dead. Recovery was its own kind of war, physical therapy that made strong men weep, surgeries to pin bones back together, to repair damage that the doctors said was career-ending. Endless paperwork, medical boards, well-meaning people suggesting she take the honorable discharge and move on with her life. She remembered the moment she decided differently. It was 3 months into recovery, during a particularly brutal PT session. Her therapist, a former Army medic named Williams, was pushing her to walk 10 steps without the walker. She made it 6 before her legs gave out. Williams caught her before she hit the ground, and she remembered the look on his face, pity mixed with professional concern. That look decided everything. She didn't want pity. She didn't want concern. She wanted to be so capable, so undeniably competent, that no one would ever look at her with anything less than respect earned through demonstrated ability. That night, lying in her hospital bed, she researched naval special warfare. She knew the statistics. Less than 25% of candidates made it through BUD-S, basic underwater demolition SEAL training. The attrition rate for candidates with her injury history was essentially 100%. No one came back from a broken back to pass Hell Week, the 5.5-day crucible that broke most healthy candidates. It was impossible, which meant it was exactly what she needed to prove. Her first attempt at selection came 11 months after the crash. She lasted 3 days before her back gave out. The instructors, to their credit, treated her fairly, neither expecting less nor giving her latitude. When she couldn't continue, they processed her out with professionalism. She spent 6 months training harder, addressing her weaknesses, building strength in muscles that had atrophied during her recovery. Her second attempt lasted until Hell Week, until the second day of carrying boats overhead and running in soft sand and cold water immersion. Her body quit, simple as that. She spent another 8 months preparing, changed her diet, her training regimen, her entire approach, worked with specialists in sports medicine, in pain management, in exercise physiology. When she showed up for her third attempt, she was 31 years old and carried scars that told a story most people couldn't imagine. This time she made it, not because the training was easier, but because she'd learned something the first 2 attempts had taught her. Pain was negotiable. Exhaustion was temporary. The only thing that actually stopped you was deciding to stop. She finished Bud S in the middle of her class. Not first, not last, right in the middle where competence lived. The instructors never acknowledged her history, never mentioned that she'd failed twice before, never treated her differently because of her gender or her previous career. They just evaluated her on the only metric that mattered. Could she do the job? She could. After Bud S came SEAL qualification training, months of learning the actual craft of special operations. Then language school, tactical training, specialty schools for advanced skills. By the time she received her trident, pinned to her uniform in a ceremony that felt both monumental and anticlimactic, she'd been training for almost 3 years. Most of the candidates she'd started with had long since moved on to other opportunities or dropped out. She'd outlasted them through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. Her first deployment as a SEAL operator was to Syria, part of a task unit working with Kurdish forces against ISIS. She spent 6 months moving through dusty cities and empty deserts, doing work that would never be acknowledged publicly. When she came home, the nightmares from Afghanistan had been joined by new ones. That was the price. The cost of being effective in places where effectiveness meant violence. People asked her sometimes if it was worth it. The sacrifice, the pain, the years of her life spent pursuing something most people considered impossible. She never knew how to answer that question. Standing on her balcony, watching the last light fade from the sky, Raina thought about Voss's challenge coin still in her pocket. She pulled it out and looked at it in the dimming light. Fallujah, 2005. Voss would have been about the same age Marcus Webb was when he died. Just kids, really, sent to do impossible things in impossible places. The military took young people and transformed them through pressure and purpose into something harder, more capable. But it also took pieces of them that could never be returned. Innocence, maybe, or the belief that the world was fundamentally just and fair. She went inside and placed the coin on her dresser, next to the small collection of similar tokens she'd accumulated over the years. Challenge coins from different units, different operations, different moments when someone had decided she'd earned their respect. They were the only decorations in her apartment, the only things she displayed with anything like pride. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ashworth. Good work today. Brass wants a full report. Also, the Marines requested you for their advanced MCMAP instructor course. Interested? Raina smiled slightly. 6 hours ago, those same Marines had been ready to teach her a lesson. Now they wanted her to teach them. That was the thing about demonstrated competence. It cut through assumptions like a knife through silk. She texted back, "Send me the details." Then she made herself dinner, simple pasta with vegetables, and ate standing at the counter while reading news on her phone. Wars in distant places, political fighting at home, the usual churn of human conflict and cooperation playing out on screens worldwide. At some point, the work she did would be declassified, and historians would debate its necessity, its morality, its effectiveness. But that was decades in the future. Right now, in the present, it was just work. Hard work that required hard people, but work nonetheless. She cleaned her dishes, set them in the rack to dry, and stood looking at her reflection in the window. The woman looking back was lean, scarred, harder than the pilot who had climbed into that Black Hawk all those years ago. But the eyes were the same. Still determined, still looking for the next challenge, still refusing to accept that anything was impossible until she'd proven it herself. Outside, the Pacific Ocean continued its eternal rhythm against the California coast. Tomorrow there would be more briefings, more training, more preparation for missions she couldn't discuss with anyone outside the community. But tonight, standing in her small apartment in Encinitas, Reina allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd proven something today. Not to the Marines, though they'd learned. Not to Ashworth, though he'd taken notes. She'd proven it to herself, that same thing she'd been proving since the day she decided to walk again despite the doctor's doubts. That the human will, properly directed, was stronger than circumstance, that you could break and rebuild yourself into something new, that the only real limitations were the ones you accepted. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from someone she hadn't heard from in months, another SEAL team operator she'd worked with in Syria. "Heard you humbled some jarheads today. Nice work, Monarch. Beer sometime," she replied. "Next time I'm up near Pendleton." Then she set the phone aside and walked to her bedroom. The small desk held her laptop and a few books, mostly technical manuals and operational planning guides. But there was one other thing, a photograph in a simple frame, kept face down in the drawer. She pulled it out and looked at it for the first time in weeks. The picture showed her in her flight suit, standing in front of her Black Hawk with Marcus Webb and James Rivera. They were all smiling, young and confident, unaware that in 3 days Marcus would be dead, and Rivera would lose his legs, and she would spend the next year learning to walk again. She looked at their faces for a long moment, then carefully placed the photo back in the drawer, face down, and closed it. Some memories deserve to be kept but not displayed. Some prices, once paid, became the foundation you built everything else upon. Reina changed into PT gear and did an hour of yoga, stretching muscles that had been tested earlier in the day, working through the familiar poses that kept her body functional despite the accumulated damage. Then she showered, set her alarm, and lay in bed looking at the ceiling, waiting for sleep. It came eventually, as it always did, though the dreams that accompanied it were rarely peaceful. Somewhere in the Hindu Kush, a Black Hawk was falling from the sky over and over in an endless loop that her subconscious refused to forget. But she'd learned to live with the dreams. They were just more information, more data points that reminded her why she'd made the choices she'd made. You couldn't change the past. You could only decide what to build from its wreckage. The next morning, Reina was up before dawn, running along the beach in the gray pre-sunrise light. Her breath came in steady rhythms, her feet finding purchase in the soft sand, her mind clear of everything except the physical sensation of movement. Other runners passed going the opposite direction, civilians starting their day with exercise, and she wondered what they saw when they looked at her. Just another jogger, probably. Someone working out, staying fit, living the California dream. They couldn't see the scars under her shirt or the titanium in her spine. They couldn't see the trident tattooed over her ribs or the memories she carried like stones in her pockets. That was fine. She'd never needed anyone to see. She only needed to know, herself, what she was capable of surviving and overcoming. At 0600 she was back at her apartment, showered and in uniform, ready for whatever the day required. Her phone showed another message from Ashworth. Conference call at 0900, new tasking, classified. The morning briefing turned out to be about a training opportunity, a joint exercise with Army Special Forces in North Carolina. 3 weeks of advanced close-quarters battle training, working with Delta operators who were considered the best in the business. Reina listened to the operational overview, the training objectives, the administrative details. When Ashworth asked if she was interested, she didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Good. You leave Monday. Pack for cold weather. Fort Bragg in January is not California. After the call, she spent the day preparing, updating her training records, coordinating with the administrative staff who handled travel and logistics. By late afternoon, she had everything arranged. That evening, instead of going home, she drove to the SEAL team compound and hit the gym. It was mostly empty, just a few operators running through workouts. She found an open space and went through her routine, the combination of weightlifting, bodyweight exercises, and stretching that had been refined over years. Halfway through, one of the younger team members, a kid named Martinez who just graduated Bud S 6 months ago, approached nervously. "Excuse me, ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Solis." Raina finished her set of pull-ups before dropping to the ground. "Yeah, I heard about yesterday, with the Marines." Word traveled fast in the special operations community. "What about it?" Martinez seemed to struggle with how to phrase his question. "How did you? I mean, they said you took down 6 Marines in no time at all. How is that possible?" Raina grabbed her water bottle and took a drink while she considered her answer. She could give him the technical response, break down the mechanics of technique and leverage. But looking at his young face, earnest and seeking something more than just physical tactics, she decided to be honest. "It's possible because I spent years learning, failing, and learning more. Because I worked with the best instructors I could find and I didn't make excuses when things were hard. Because I decided that being capable mattered more than being comfortable." Martinez nodded, but she could tell he wanted more. "But how do you get to that level? I'm good at the tactical stuff. I passed Bud S. But when I see operators like you or the senior guys, it's like you're operating on a different plane." "How do you bridge that gap?" Raina set down her water bottle. "You don't bridge it. You build it brick by brick, rep by rep, day after day, until one day you look back and realize you're not the same person who started. There's no shortcut. There's no secret technique. There's just the decision to never stop improving and the discipline to follow through on that decision even when it's boring or painful or you don't see immediate results. But what if you're not naturally talented enough?" Now she smiled, and it was almost sad. "Martinez, I crashed a helicopter into a mountain. I broke my back. I failed Bud S twice. Whatever you think natural talent is, I promise you I don't have it. What I have is the refusal to let anything except death stop me. That's not talent, that's just stubbornness that got channeled into something productive." Martinez absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, ma'am. Get back to work. The only way to get better is to do the work." She watched him return to his weights, already applying more focus to his form. That was the thing about being honest with the younger operators. They needed to know that the people they looked up to hadn't been born capable. They'd been built, forged through effort and failure and the refusal to accept limitations. If she could give them that, if she could pass on the understanding that excellence was constructed rather than innate, then maybe they'd push themselves harder, reach further, become more than they thought possible. The rest of the week passed in preparation. Raina updated her cold weather gear, reviewed the training syllabus for the Fort Bragg course, and caught up on administrative work that had accumulated. She also made a trip to San Diego to visit Rivera, her former crew chief. He lived in a small house in Chula Vista with his wife and 3 kids, the family somehow louder and more chaotic every time she visited. Rivera was in his wheelchair in the garage when she arrived, working on some elaborate project involving wood and power tools. He looked up when her shadow fell across his workbench and his face split into a huge smile. "Monarch, nobody told me you were coming." She handed him the 6-pack of craft beer she'd brought. "Surprise visit. How's the leg situation?" It was their running joke, the way he refused to be serious about his injury. Rivera had lost both legs below the knee in the crash, but he approached his disability with a combination of dark humor and relentless positivity that made it impossible to pity him. "Same as always. Still can't feel my toes, but hey, I save a fortune on shoes." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me what you've been up to. Maria said she saw something on the SEAL team Facebook page about you embarrassing some Marines." Raina sat and grabbed one of the beers. "Cross-service training demonstration. Hand-to-hand combat evaluation. And it went well." Rivera laughed, the sound filling the garage. "I bet it did. Those jarheads had no idea what they were walking into, did they? They learned. That's what you do, Monarch. You teach people that their assumptions are wrong." He took a long drink of his beer. "So what brings you down here? You never visit without a reason." She should have known he'd see through the social call pretense. Rivera had been reading people since before she knew him. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing, how the family's doing. We're good. Maria's working part-time at the school district. Kids are growing too fast. Tommy's in Little League, Alina's doing dance, and Carlos just learned to ride a bike. It's chaos, but it's good chaos. He looked at her carefully. But you didn't drive down here to hear about my kids' activities. What's really going on? Reina took a long moment before answering. I think about the crash sometimes, about Marcus, about what we could have done differently. Rivera's expression softened. We did everything right, Monarch. You know that. Perfect pre-flight, correct procedures, proper evasion. That RPG was bad luck and bad intelligence. Nothing we could have controlled. Marcus died because I couldn't get us on the ground safely. Marcus died because an insurgent fired a rocket-propelled grenade at our aircraft. You kept us alive long enough for rescue. You maintained control during an uncontrolled descent with catastrophic damage. You saved my life, even if I lost my legs in the process. He leaned forward. Listen to me. I've had 6 years to think about that day. 6 years of physical therapy, of learning to walk again, of figuring out who I am without legs. You know what conclusion I came to? That we survived because you're a hell of a pilot and because you didn't give up even when giving up would have been the easier choice. Reina felt something tight in her chest, the emotion she usually kept locked away. I should have been able to do more. You did everything.